Good morning, everybody. Welcome to meeting number 2 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Pursuant to the motion of the House of June 18, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence here in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I think all the members are in person for this one right now. Before we continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all the participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card, which links to a short awareness video. I would like to make few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and all the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. And I would really like to welcome our 3 witnesses for this panel. We are joined virtually by Geeta Libesik, professor at McMaster University, by video conferencing. We are also joined in person by Stephen Pinker, the Johnstone Family Professor of Psychology, Harvard University. Welcome. And the third witness for today is Azim Sharif, the professor at the University of British Columbia, and he's joined by video conference. So welcome and thanks a lot for coming. And with that, we will go to the witnesses, and the first one will be Ms. Geeta Libesik. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Just checking, we can't see you online. I'm not sure if we're only doing audio or we have video too in the room.
Technical issue, but we can see you and you can go ahead with the 5 minutes. The clerk is looking into that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee on science and research today. It's an honor to share my experiences on how federal funding criteria impact research excellence in Canada. Public investment in research is vital for advancing knowledge, solving complex problems, and training future researchers. However, evaluating proposals is challenging. Reviewers aim to fund research that positively impacts Canadians through innovation, evidence, and creativity, and in ways that improve our understanding of the world, quality of life, and equity. Conventional measures of excellence often focus on quantitative indicators like number of grants and publications, awards and scholarships, number of students graduated, individual track record, and proposal strength. While these do reflect academic productivity, they don't always capture real-world impacts such as informing policy and community decisions, improving health and education practices and outcomes, supporting economic growth, advancing reconciliation, and promoting environmental sustainability and social equity. Researchers highlight these impacts in applications, but measuring them remains difficult, and this creates challenges for rigorous, fair, and consistent approaches to evaluation. So, my name is Geeta Libesik. I'm a professor in the School of Earth, Environment, and Society at McMaster University. and I lead the Straight Up North, or SUN, research team. I'm a geographer trained in both natural and social sciences, working at the intersection of cultural and environmental geography. My research is rooted in respectful collaboration with Indigenous knowledge holders to address complex social and ecological issues. For over 25 years, I've worked primarily with Inuit communities in Nunavut, and through students and collaborators, I've been involved in projects across Inuit Nunangat, which is Inuit homelands in the Canadian Arctic, and with First Nations and Métis communities in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. Our SUN team aims to ensure that research benefits our community partners, informs decision-making, improves research practice, and supports emerging Northern researchers. So my recommendations here today reflect personal experience in community-engaged and interdisciplinary research. Federal funding criteria must include qualitative indicators that rigorously and fairly assess research excellence. I have experience working with NSERC, with SSHRC, with CIHR, receiving those funds as well as reviewing applications, and interdisciplinary initiatives through Tri-Council, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Funding policies have evolved to better support interdisciplinary research, EDI initiatives to support Indigenous leadership, partnerships, early career researchers, mentorship, and knowledge mobilization. However, alongside these important policy changes, as well as targeted funding opportunities and new requirements in proposals, the conventional quantitative and academic focused metrics of excellence need to be re-envisioned. So there's 6 ways that I propose this can be achieved, and I would be happy to expand on any of these today or in follow-up written testimony. So my suggestions are to ensure representation of reviewers with direct cultural or community-specific experience in funding evaluation committees, to ensure representation of early career researchers as reviewers for early career research-specific funding pools, to consider the amount of time dedicated to community-engaged and partnership research when assessing the rationale, methodology, budget, and claims of significance in a proposal, to extend consideration of training and mentorship contributions beyond academic highly qualified personnel, to assess partnerships according to their diversity of roles, strengths of relationships, and evidence of collective planning and implementation. And the last one is to recognize that knowledge mobilization goes beyond academic audiences and public outreach. In the few minutes I've had today, I've offered these 6 specific recommendations to refine how federal research funding is assessed and allocated. How excellence is defined influences the conduct of partnerships, approaches to mentorship, and whether
you can please wind up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whether disciplinary norms evolve to meet complex challenges. So alongside academic records, we must assess impact track records. So 5 minutes is a short time to present substantive ideas. The committee's study here deserves thoughtful discussion, and I welcome the opportunity for more dialogue today and to further contribute to the committee initiatives in the future.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.
And with that, we will now proceed. Now we will proceed to our second witness, Mr. Pinker. Mr. Pinker, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Madame Zahid, Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca, members of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. As a proud Canadian and graduate of Dawson College and McGill University, it is a tremendous honor to speak to you today about diversity in science. Starting in the late 1970s, the concept diversity became popular in the United States after the Supreme Court ruled...
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Pinker. There is some technical difficulty. We will have to suspend the meeting for a minute. You can start from the beginning. We will give you 5 minutes, so please start from the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Pink.
Madame Zahid, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, and members of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. As a proud Canadian and graduate of Dawson College and McGill University, it's a tremendous honor to speak to you today about diversity in science. Starting in the late 1970s, the concept of diversity became popular in the United States after the Supreme Court ruled that explicit racial quotas in university admissions were a form of unconstitutional discrimination, but that it was acceptable for schools to favor minority students if the goal was to enhance the educational experience of all students by having a diverse student body. Over time, the laudable goal of diversity morphed into policies that increasingly used race and sex as criteria in admissions, hiring, and funding. That was the D in DEI, or EDI. More recently, the term viewpoint diversity became popular as an ironic response to racial and gender diversity. As the joke went, in a university, diversity means people who look different and think alike. Viewpoint diversity, in contrast, is the form of diversity that really matters in scientific and intellectual life. It is simply not true, indeed one might say it is a form of prejudice, to assume that all women or all members of a racial or ethnic minority think in a particular way. A diversity of viewpoints, though, is necessary to do science properly. This is not because diversity is aesthetically pleasing, it's because people are not omniscient or infallible. As a cognitive scientist, I can attest that the human mind is vulnerable to many biases and fallacies. The strongest is the my side bias, the conviction that my own tribe or coalition or party is correct, and that a rival coalition is ignorant or evil or both. People are poor at spotting their own biases. As the economist Joan Robinson put it, ideology is like breath. You never smell your own. The reason that science can proceed despite these blind spots is that we're much better at spotting someone else's biases. In a community in which people with different viewpoints can criticize those they disagree with, without fear of punishment, censorship, or cancellation, one person can point out another's errors, and the whole community can be more rational than any of the individuals in it. In contrast, there are several reasons to fear that diversity, in the DEI sense of allocating funding to scientists based on their race or sex, works against the interests of science and the nation. First, it can be inherently unfair. Funding is a zero-sum game. If people of one sex or skin color are given an advantage, then others of a different sex or skin color are being put at a disadvantage. This was the reason that my own institution lost another famous Supreme Court case, Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, in 2023. The court ruled that in favoring Hispanics and African Americans in admissions, Harvard was unconstitutionally discriminating against Asian Americans. Second, it can be a waste of taxpayer money. If grant dollars don't go to scientific research that is judged to be of highest quality and priority. Of course, reviewers of grant proposals are themselves subject to biases, including racism and sexism, but this means that the biases themselves should be minimized through blind review, audits, and the most objective measures of quality and influence we can find. Third, while it's laudable to attract the widest range of talent in science and to overcome past barriers to inclusion, the awarding of grants takes place at the end of the science training pipeline, far too late in a person's life to rectify social and historical inequities. Obsessing over statistical differences in the awarding of research grants draws attention away from formative influences that create inequities in the first place, including education from the preschool years through university, and social and cultural norms that make science attractive as a career. Finally, the promotion of diversity in gender and ethnicity, at the same time that diversity in opinion is constricted by censorship, cancellation, or intellectual monocultures, undermines public trust in science. I often mention to audiences or interviewers that the massive scientific consensus is that human activity is warming the planet. Many times a listener has replied, but why should we trust the consensus if it comes from a clique that does not favor the best science and that punishes anyone who disagrees with the orthodoxy? Recent events in the United States, with which I'm guessing you're familiar, illustrate the dangers that can result when politicians and the public lose trust in science. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pinker. We will now go to Mr. Sharif, who has joined this panel through the video conference. So, Mr. Sharif, you can go ahead and you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You are on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak before this committee. So my name is Azim Sharif, and I'm a professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia. I was born and educated in Canada, first at the University of Toronto, and then for my doctorate at UBC, and later held faculty positions in the US before being invited back home under the Canada 150 Research Chair program. In light of this committee's study, my most useful contribution today would be to share my observations about how well-intentioned policies surrounding the Canada Research Chair program have played out in practice. As you all know, the CRC program serves as one of Canada's primary tools for attracting and retaining highly impactful researchers. To fulfill its mandate to support research excellence, the program has, over its 25-year tenure, adjusted its policies with regards to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, there are many rationales for why academia should prioritize these values. A faculty that is more representative of the Canadian population earns trust and legitimacy with the community. It is also more attuned to the full spectrum of questions that Canadians care about. But chief among the reasons, from a public interest standpoint, is that removing barriers to access means that nothing prevents the most talented scholars from transmuting their talent into the products of research that benefit us all. To achieve this goal, the CRC program set 2029 equity targets for groups that were severely underrepresented at the program's outset: women and gender equity-seeking groups, racialized individuals like myself, persons with disabilities, and Indigenous peoples. Targets that have been largely reached nationally for all groups. That said, not all targets for all groups have been reached at all institutions. And as per the 2019 policy adjustment, so long as an institution trails behind its targets on any one group, it is restricted from submitting new chairholder nominations for individuals outside of any of these groups. There are two concerns with this policy in terms of how it operates on the ground. First, aggregating the equity groups this way serves as a blunt and sometimes ineffective way of addressing barriers. The pool of scholars who are racialized individuals or from women and gender equity-seeking groups is much larger and thus much easier to hire from than the pool of Indigenous peoples or persons with disabilities. As a consequence, the policy incentivizes some institutions, like mine, to swell their ranks of women and racialized individuals well beyond their targets, while continuing to trail the targets for the latter two groups. The second concern is the impact to the public interest of the restriction in the first place. As I noted earlier, any barrier to equal access impoverishes everyone because it fails to position the most talented individuals into the roles where their talent can do the most good. And yet, with the restrictive policy, the CRC program employs exactly this kind of barrier, closing doors rather than opening them. Here's a case study of how this plays out. Several years ago, my department sought to fill a Tier 1 CRC vacancy. We were replacing the retiring director of a highly productive global excellence research cluster on language sciences. Since this needed to be a senior scholar with a particular expertise, the pool of candidates was already small. But since it was a CRC hire, it further narrowed this pool to members of the four equity-seeking groups, excluding many of the most relevant and impactful scholars. This left very few qualified candidates indeed, and only one who was both above our thresholds and open to moving from her institution in the US. Unable to meet her requirements and without any backup options, the search failed, the CRC was revoked, and the future of the Institute and Research Cluster is now in jeopardy. Equity and social justice are important goals of the CRC program. However, by explicitly excluding a body of scholars, this restrictive policy creates an unnecessary conflict. It sets those aims against the program's broader goal of improving our depth of knowledge and quality of life for all Canadians, leaving talent on the table. This is especially pressing right now. We're currently seeing the academic environment in the United States undermined by attacks to academic freedom and devastating cuts to research funding. America is the global center of science and research. The whole world will lose out from the disruption to knowledge creation that they will now experience. Canada is best positioned to pick up that slack. For high-impact scholars choosing to leave the US, the most attractive alternative is to come to the University of Toronto or to Waterloo or UBC. The world needs these people to remain productive. I would encourage Canada to reconsider the trade-offs involved in keeping one hand of its CRC program tied behind its back. We should refine our policies accordingly. Science and scholarship work best when everyone is invited to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time. Now we will go to our round of questioning, and the first round will be 6 minutes each. We will start our round of questioning with Mr. Baldinelli. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see all of my colleagues again, and look forward to working with all of you on this committee as we proceed. Thank you to the witnesses for being here as well. It's an important study. I mean, this past July, just think, I mean, the industry minister announced $1.3 billion had been awarded in federal research funding. Right? I mean, this study, which we're picking up, builds upon the work of the committee from the previous Parliament and wants to examine and receive input and feedback on the various criteria used in awarding these federal funds. Ms. Lubjak, you had talked about, the use of quantitative criteria and how that may be harmful. I mean, we've heard previous testimony, for example, from colleges who say they're precluded from some of these research funding, for example. And we've also heard the issue with regards to DEI and its use in criteria and how that may impact science as well. And Mr. Pinker, I'd like to thank you for your comments. You had talked about DEI works against the interests of science. And I was looking back at some of the previous testimony, and when we go back to November of 2024, we had Dr. Jeremy Kerr, a professor of the Department of Biology at the University of Ottawa. When he was asked by one of the committee members how important are diversity and inclusion in research when providing accurate data, he replied, "I want to be really clear here. As I said, our objective is not to implement an affirmative action program. Our objective is to achieve excellence on behalf of Canadians. That's not to say diversity of views or diverse backgrounds is not important." And I just wonder if you could pick up on that when you talked about some of your comments, and again, that notion of how DEI works against the interests of science.
Yes, it very much echoes my remarks that diversity of viewpoints is essential because of cognitive limitations by which people overvalue their own viewpoint. It's only by getting opposing viewpoints that collectively we can hope to be more rational, better able to seek the truth than any of us is individually. But diversity of skin color, diversity of chromosomes, is no guarantee of better science because people of a given ethnicity or of a given sex don't all think alike. Yep. And if we had fair criteria to pick the best scientists and the best science, then ideally that would be the ultimate way of reducing discrimination because it would zero in on quality, ignoring irrelevant criteria such as skin color or sex.
Thank you. And Professor Sharif, you had also mentioned that I think your comment was barriers to equal access harm all, and so closing doors rather than opening them is harmful in the use of the criteria. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. So the point I was just trying to make is that with the CRC program, there's an explicit policy to bar a certain demographic, that is able-bodied white men, from being nominated for these chairs, using these chairs to attract them or retain them in Canada. And I feel that whenever you shrink the pool of talent that you are picking from, you're more likely to miss out on the most talented individuals. So I don't think it's something that we should explicitly restrict in any means.
Well, and to your point, thank you for that. I mean, it also leads to faulty science. I mean, I was reading an article from Jeff Horstman. He's an associate professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Wilfrid Laurier University. And he's basically saying, talking to a colleague, I have made my peace with EDI, this colleague said to him. I will lie about my most deeply held beliefs or convictions on paper in order to get funding. If you believe in merit and competency, they're basically saying, shut up, just lie on your application to get the funding. I mean, that doesn't advance science. I mean, what we're having now is individuals having been put in a position that they know unless they tick off a box, they're not going to get their program funded. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, well, many American universities require so-called diversity statements, in which an applicant for a professorship has to basically endorse the policies of DEI, including racial preferences, and has to endorse the critical social justice theory as to why there are racial disparities. Now, I've had students who've had ChatGPT write their diversity statements because they could not honestly fill them out. It would go against their conscience to say things that they knew were not true, but they knew they would be blackballed and eliminated from a job if they expressed their true opinions. That's one of the reasons why many universities, including now my own, Harvard, has gotten rid of diversity statements. But also, I think it is a peculiar version of social justice that says that the composition of a scientific body, a university body, a pool of funded scientists has to match the demographics of the population at large. It leads to, I think, rather monstrous consequences, like saying there are too many Asians on this committee, or too many Asians are getting funded, or too many Jews, or too many Sikhs, or too many Arabs. It is just not going to be the case that every ethnic group, every sex is going to be perfectly represented in proportion to their membership in the population. But if we are truly seeking quality, that should not matter. We don't have to count. There may be discrepancies. They can go in different directions. But if we're funding the best science, we get the best science.
Thank you, Mr. Pinker. Your time is up. Just to remind all the members, all the questions should be directed through the chair. And now we will go to MP Noor Mohammed for 6 minutes. MP Noor Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm going to pick up, Professor Sharif, where you left off, and it's good to see you again. It's been a long time. Probably, 30 years, maybe longer. It's great to see you. I want to pick up where you left off in terms of talking about the importance of making sure that we are able to attract our best and brightest and make sure we have the best and brightest minds regardless of some of these criteria, which may be important, but that we should not index on those to make sure we have the best, we have the best folks around the table. What, in your view, is the best way for Canada to approach poaching talent, I'm going to say it bluntly, from the U.S., where folks are feeling uncomfortable right now about the threats to academia and sort of this pervasive attitude that you have to think a certain way or your funding is going to get cut? What do we need to do to make sure that we aren't falling into the wrong traps on either side of this conversation to make sure we're attracting the best talent without leaning in on this perceived attack on woke ideology, which I want to get to, whatever the hell that means, in a way that gets us the best talent here and allows us to do the best types of research while also building an inclusive environment for academics?
Sure. Madam Chair, thank you to the member for his question. One of the areas of my research is looking at institutional trust and perceived politicization. One of the challenges that we've discovered is that once people perceive an institution to be politicized, this has a negative impact on trust, not just on the people who perceive the institution to be on the opposite side of their politics, but also the people who are on the same side of their politics. Scientists and the consumers of science and the consumers of scholarship do not want their institutions to be politicized. So Canada, unfortunately, has a reputation of having a somewhat politicized academy. Dr. Pinker talked about the impact that the perceptions of politicization are now having in the U.S. Canada has an opportunity here to try to be a safe haven for a more objective, a less politicized academy, people who are trying to flee a politicized and undermined academic environment in the U.S. could hopefully find a more flexible, free funding climate in Canada, as well as an academy that tries to lower the temperature on politicization. Politicization in science it's like bacteria in a operating room. There's no way you'll be able to get rid of it entirely, but you do want to do as much as you can to remove it. And I don't think you should trust any surgeon who's not trying to do that.
Thank you. And I'm just going to follow up with one more question to you. I'm going to then throw the same question over to Professor Pinker. In watching President Trump's attacks on my two alma maters, Princeton and Harvard, and the threats to cuts, what we've seen is cuts to funding for cancer research, diabetes, new ways of farming, preschool development, teacher quality. These are all things that have been affected by this attack on what is being termed, quote unquote, woke ideology. And we've heard this term woke ideology being used by the leader of the opposition in this country, saying that he wants to cut, quote unquote, woke ideology from Canadian universities. Now, when you hear terms like that and you hear the types of attacks on universities that are being made under that guise and that cover, does it concern you that Canada might go down a similar road in terms of using that as a cover to attack academic freedom, academic research, and academic intellectual expansion?
Oh, yes, it does.
Thank you. Oh.
Professor Sharif, and then to Professor Pinker, sorry.
Okay, well, yes, it does concern me. I think that as I said, there's a danger of politicization which attracts the targeting from both sides. There's a sociologist and physician at Yale University named Nicholas Christakis. He had an interesting point that once universities made themselves political actors, they made themselves political targets. And I think we're seeing that very much in the United States, and it should be in Canada's interest to do everything that it can to avoid the fate that academia is now having there in the U.S.
Thanks. Professor Pinker, I'm going to throw the same question over to you, and I just want to say I really enjoyed your piece on Harvard derangement syndrome, because I think it brought to light some of the concerns that folks have about when the attacks become blanket. And you use the example of the impact on Jewish professors as a perfect example of when you're using perhaps one angle, the broader impact on research, on science, on folks whose funding is getting cut. Can you talk a little bit about how we dial down that type of rhetoric and why it's important to dial down that type of rhetoric in Canada so we don't fall into the same trap, and then also follow up on the question I asked Professor Sharif?
Yes, well, yes. I certainly agree with Professor Sharif, quoting my friend Nicholas Christakis, that once the universities politicize themselves, they have opened the door to being themselves targets of political attacks, that it is essential for universities to keep their reputation as disinterested pursuers of the truth, not captive to a particular ideology, because the threats can come from both directions. In the United States, the threats now from the federal government are worse than the threats from within, but they're because the government is so much more powerful, but the threats are coming from both
Sorry
directions.
for interrupting. Time is up. Thank you. And now we will move to MP Blanchet-Joncas. You will have 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Mme la Présidente. Je remercie les témoins qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui pour cette importante étude. Première question va être professeur Pinker. Les politiques équité, diversité, inclusion ne risquent-elles pas de remplacer le mérite par des considérations politiques et ainsi de miner la confiance du public envers la science? Et si la science est perçue comme idéologique, cela ne risque-t-il pas aussi de fragiliser la confiance publique, même sur des enjeux comme le climat?
Yes, I will. I did not get the translation, but I think I can remember enough from my Protestant School Board of Greater Montreal French to understand your question. Indeed, the influence of ideology on science means that it's not the best science if there are a priori convictions that are putting a thumb on the scale And the great danger is that, as I've mentioned, as Professor Sharif mentioned, it undermines trust in science. The public has to know that their tax dollars are going to the best possible science. They have to know that the people conducting the science are open to criticism, open to a diversity of viewpoints, in order that they trust what the scientists say. That scientists not become just a priesthood in white coats that are competing with other influencers, but actually have grounds for their claims to be taken seriously.
Madame la Présidente, c'est possible de mettre sur pause le témoignage de M. Pinker, m'assurer que la traduction fonctionne bien. Il a affirmé qu'il n'avait pas la traduction.
If I can ask the clerk to look into it, is the interpretation. Is it good now? Okay. We'll start the clock. Please.
Merci beaucoup.
Go ahead.
Professeur Pinker, vous avez affirmé que l'octroi des subventions arrive trop tard pour corriger des inégalités sociales. Où faudrait-il intervenir plus tôt dans le parcours éducation, formation, culture scientifique pour réellement élargir l'accès à la science et renforcer l'excellence?
Well, first and foremost, the quality of science education, starting in elementary school. Second, to be sure that science itself does not seem to have a political coloring that would turn off the part of the population from a different part of the political spectrum. If science is seen as a left-wing activity, people on the right will blow it off. That's probably the main reason. In fact, that is certainly the main reason for rejection of scientific consensus in the studies that I have seen. It is not because of scientific ignorance. It is because of perceived ideological contamination of science. The third, though, is not easy for governments to manipulate, and that is cultural norms as to whether science is an attractive career option. That depends on peer influence, it depends on culture, it depends on many things that government policy may not easily be able to control directly. Is science cool?
Oui, monsieur. Professeur Pinker, après la décision de la Cour suprême américaine dans l'affaire SSFA contre Harvard, contre les admissions fondées sur la race, croyez-vous qu'il est moralement et scientifiquement erroné d'attribuer des chaires de recherche ou des subventions sur la base du sexe ou de la race plutôt que du mérite scientifique ou de l'excellence?
Well, the American Supreme Court decision referred to university admissions. It's widely expected that it will be extended to promotion, to hiring, and to granting. So we are in the midst of quite a bit of turmoil in the United States, including the extreme slashing of all support for basic science, a slashing of the indirect costs that universities incur in the process of spending dollars, and cuts to rather arbitrary cuts to many programs. I expect that grants that are targeted on the base of sex or race will be in the crosshairs, targeted by an extension of the Supreme Court decision.
Merci, Professeur Pinker. Vous avez soutenu que la diversité des points de vue est plus cruciale pour le progrès scientifique que la diversité démographique promue par les politiques équité, diversité, inclusion. Pourquoi, surtout sachant qu'elle aide à corriger les biais cognitifs qui touchent toute communauté scientifique?
So diversity of viewpoints is a complicated problem because you don't want the diversity to be so broad that you have people who support a flat earth, people who deny the 2020 U.S. election. There's an infinite number of viewpoints, many of which should not be discussed in a university context because they have no grounds for believing them. So it is a challenge. I don't think it's an impossible challenge, but how do you draw a boundary around the ideas that are worth taking seriously without excluding those that just don't agree with your viewpoint? It's a challenge that I don't think universities or funding agencies have solved, but it is one that they should take seriously.
Que psychologue cognitif, vous avez décrit le mindset bias, le biais de confirmation, qui limite notre capacité à voir nos propres erreurs. Comment la diversité des points de vue aide-t-elle concrètement la communauté scientifique à corriger ces biais et à progresser vers l'excellence?
Yes, well, the diversity is indispensable simply because even though we all have our blind spots, we're a little better at pointing to the other guy's blind spots. So if I I'm not seeing something, someone else will tell me that I'm wrong. That is why academic freedom of speech is such an essential value in the conduct of science, not because professors deserve privileges, but just because it is essential to doing their jobs.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. Maybe you will get an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to our second round, and we will go to Mr. MP Ho for 5 minutes. MP Ho, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is directed at Mr. Pinker. So, do you agree that universities should be a forum for the free exchange of ideas, including the discussion of dissenting opinions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Essential.
It is essential. You mentioned DEI quotas are a form of discrimination, effectively, and effectively a form of reverse discrimination. Do you agree that doing this sort of DEI checkbox and all these affirmative statements that they're now requiring in Canada has a chilling effect on research, because you're effectively shutting off half of the population from being able to participate in an honest way?
I think it can chill research in two ways. One of them is by excluding sectors of the population based on their sex or ethnicity or race. But the other is, on top of the preferences, there's a regime that it is a criminal offense to criticize the policy of preferences. We've seen that in the United States. We've seen that in Canada, where people who cast doubt on the policy, who argue against it, get censured, get fired, get canceled, and that adds another layer of chill, probably a more severe chill.
Yeah, well, that's really unfortunate to hear. And that these liberal top-down policies effectively shut out half the population from being able to participate, and effectively blocking high-quality research from being produced at some of the top institutions in the country. When it comes to, let's say, astronomy or physics or even medicine, you mentioned that it's a zero-sum game out in research. There's limited government resources to be granted. Shouldn't the best person for the job get it? Looking at, or the person with the best potential? Let's say we're doing cancer research and we're trying to find a treatment to a type of cancer that could save many, many lives, millions of lives potentially. Shouldn't the best research the grants go to the best person, or the person with the best potential to achieve those aims?
Yes, I believe that is the most defensible policy. Now, at the margins, there are often judgment calls where there are proposals where, at the end of the day, you throw up your hands, I don't know which one is better. If in cases like that you tilt it so that underrepresented groups get the benefit of the doubt, I don't think that is harmful as long as they are within the envelope of the best quality research.
But the race and the sex of the researcher probably shouldn't have any effect on the quality of the research. We're studying cancer, we're studying physics or something like that. So by imposing this top-down ideology from liberal ideology, it almost feels like that they're trying to, it's political. They're politicizing it, and they're implementing it into our great institutions, which is universities and colleges. Do you agree that it is potentially a venue for liberal ideology to permeate and to implement it?
Well, I guess I would have to ask whether liberal has a capital L or a small L in this context.
Capital L.
Yes. Well, I don't want to single out one of the parties because many of these policies, at least in the United States, have taken place under leadership of both parties. But
it does have an effect of imposing a political view onto
one can imagine
researchers.
certain circumscribed exceptions if there is research, for example, in anthropology or in culture or in history on a particular group, then common sense might say that sometimes a member of that group could add specialized expertise. But in the cases you mentioned, astronomy, cancer research, climate change, and so on, then indeed the sex and race should not make a difference.
So you brought up things like social science and humanities where it could benefit from a diversity of viewpoints. Why do you think the Liberals are so concerned about people's skin color and their gender, but have absolutely no consideration to people's differing views when it comes to humanities and social science?
Yes, again, I think it goes beyond just the Liberal Party of Canada, but it applies to many Western countries and many political parties. And I think it's a problem, yes.
Thank you.
Time is up. We will now proceed to MP Rana for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And it's my honor to be the part of this committee, as I've been a student of science throughout my life. And after doing my master in civil engineering from Toronto Metropolitan University, I applied for my PhD as well, but I couldn't make it due to some time constraint. My question is towards Professor Geeta Libishish, that as she been a professor in McMaster University, and which is very close and next to my riding, I'm pleased to see your work you have been doing in Faculty of Science, and I'm curious to know how you, based on your experience with the Braden projection, have you faced more or less issues regarding the funding for research around indigenous knowledge?
Can you just repeat the end of that question, please?
Have you faced more or less issues regarding funding for research around indigenous knowledge?
Yeah, thank you for the question.
No problem.
As I mentioned, I think there's been a lot of changes over the past decade or so in Tri-Council policies, with really increasingly recognizing the value of Indigenous knowledge, encouraging Indigenous leadership in research, and encouraging partnerships. So I think there's actually more and more funding available for Indigenous scholars and or partnering with Indigenous communities. I think the challenges, though, that I was trying to highlight is how to effectively assess those partnerships, if they're respectful, if it is upholding Indigenous leadership, if it is enabling Indigenous scholars to access those funds. So I think a lot of the comments that were discussed around EDI is also really important in the context of Indigenous and other community-engaged research in terms of how it's evaluated, that researchers are not just ticking boxes to be able to apply to these particular sources of funding, that they're actually following through on what they say, that you can actually track partnerships and respectful, culturally appropriate methodologies in how they write their methods, in who their team is, in how they allocate their budgets is a big factor. So yeah, I think there's more support and recognition for Indigenous research, but that's where I think some of the qualitative assessments are really important to differentiate between those who get really good at writing proposals in a certain way and those that are actually really implementing meaningful, respectful approaches to research.
5% of isotopes for cancer treatment around the globe. Thank you. My next question is to Professor Sharif. As you argued for more transparency and clarity about the objectives of diversity through your work, as you just mentioned in your testimony, I would appreciate if you expand more on DEI. Importantly, the time during your academia and higher education, have you seen any shifts towards greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are you anxious we're shifting backward? Professor Sharif?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the member for his question. I have seen a shift over my career. So I've been a professor for 15 or 16 years. EDI has become more of a criteria that's been used to evaluate candidates, applicants for funding, students. All of that has increased. The conversation became, I think, pleasantly more nuanced about a year ago. And then when President Trump came to power for the second time, it's become much more heated again. I have concerns about how it is used now in Canada. I think some of the chilling effects that Dr. Pinker referred to are an issue, especially in the social sciences. I think that in addition to perhaps excluding certain scientists from different perspectives, it also has the chilling effect of making certain questions too risky or perceived as too risky to pursue funding for. There are questions that I'm able to study only because I have considerable leeway in the research funds that were allocated to me through the Canada 150 chair program that I don't think I would apply for dedicated funding to.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Sharif. Your time is up, and we will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Joncas for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Ma question va être pour Professeur Pinker. L'Université Harvard a récemment supprimé ses bureaux équité, diversité, inclusion et ses critères de recrutement liés à la diversité. Quel en a été l'impact et en quoi ces réformes pourraient-elles inspirer les organismes subventionnaires canadiens dans leur politique de financement?
Well, I think that applicants for grants will have to waste less time on showing how their research will benefit minorities. The simple bureaucratic requirements for satisfying DEA regulations are a considerable imposition, especially on smaller universities that don't have a huge infrastructure. I think it would be it's likely that it could attract ironically, a broader talent pool of people who no longer fear that simply because they are a white male or they have political opinions that are not on the left, that they are excluded from academia. Although, of course, in the United States, all this has to be taken in the context of the rather destructive slashing of research budgets and some of the onerous requirements that the Trump administration is applying. So the United States at present is a chaotic and complex situation.
Poursuivre, Professeur Sharif, j'ai écouté une de vos interventions lors d'une conférence le 6 avril dernier, 2024 précisément à Kelowna. Vous avez mentionné avoir fait votre doctorat à l'Université de Colombie-Britannique. Vous mentionnez que les chercheurs qui sont choisis sur la base de leur couleur de peau ou de leur genre peuvent se sentir mal, jugés par leurs collègues, car eux-mêmes et ces derniers savent qu'ils sont nommés, choisis, pas seulement pour leur expérience et leur savoir. Est-ce que vous pouvez élaborer à ce sujet?
Could I get a little clarification on the question?
Vous avez mentionné lors d'une conférence le 6 avril 2024 à Kelowna que les gens qui sont nommés sur la base de leur couleur de peau ou leur genre peuvent se sentir mal, jugés par leurs collègues, car eux-mêmes et ces derniers ne sentent pas qu'ils sont choisis pour leur expérience et leur savoir. Donc, j'aimerais que vous puissiez élaborer à ce que vous avez mentionné lors de cette conférence.
A quick 10-second.
Sure. Okay. Thank you to the member for the question. The point I was trying to make there is that this is in my own case as well, that I recognize that my race had an influence on my being hired. What that means is that I recognize that I was hired for different criteria than the rest of my colleagues were. I also know that they know that. When you have a field such as ours, where you're surrounded by a lot of smart people, there is a degree of imposter syndrome.
Thank you.
And,
Sorry, like time is up.
Madame la Présidente, c'est possible de demander une réponse écrite là, pour le témoin, s'il vous plaît, pour cette question?
We will ask. But if you can provide some written answers to the questions and send it to the clerk of the committee, that will be great. Those will be circulated to the members. Now we will end this session because we had 9 minutes of interruption in between because of technical issues. We will end this session at 12:10. A quick 1 minute from from Madame D. Ryder, and then 1 minute from MP McKelvey. Yeah. Okay, so like we will have, and then we will end this panel and we will go to the second panel. So Ms. D. Ryder for 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. Because 1 minute, thank you all panelists for being here today. This is going to be to you, Mr. Pinker. You mentioned that the system as it is today, if anyone goes against the current orthodox, it creates a loss of trust in science. And I think this is the most detrimental effect of what's happening today in the DEI base. I'm going to echo very quickly the article that came out. Fellow academic scientists said, "I've made my peace with EDI. I'll lie about my most deeply held beliefs and convictions on paper in order to get funding." To you, how would you assess the current merit-based criteria for federal funding in Canada, and how will that trust be eroded in time, and how quickly, especially to innovation hubs like Kitchener Centre, where I'm from?
Yes, well, I want to echo Professor Sharif in saying that there's a ripe opportunity for Canada to poach American scientists, and even as a professor at Harvard, I would like to say, poach us. The situation in the United States is threatened. The only disadvantage that Canada has is that there is a reputation for being woker than the United States, and for there being possibly onerous requirements on the range of opinions expressed, the racial and gender preferences for example, the candidate chairs. So I guess I would urge Canada not to squander the opportunity by imposing distortions of science coming from the other direction.
Thank you. And now we will end this panel with MP McKelvey for a minute. MP McKelvey, quick question.
Thank you, Chair. There was mention of worldviews earlier and the importance of incorporating worldviews by a member opposite. I am a Western scientist. That's how I've been trained. That is the worldview I use. But I also know that if I look at the world only in that context, or we only use that context, then it is incomplete. And the example I want to use of that is Indigenous knowledge. And in the environmental sciences where I come from, we know that the First Nations of this land, they already knew there was an ice age in the past. They already knew the Great Lakes were in a different location. There is a tremendous amount of knowledge that is there, and especially around sustainability. So it's important we work together. So my question is to our first speaker, Dr. Lubicek, and please correct me on your name, but could you just speak to the importance of that you see with Indigenous knowledge and with collaborative and partnerships so that we can further the field of science?
Thank you so much for your important recognition of Indigenous knowledge. It's Gita Lubicic, but no worries. I understand the challenge. Yes, this has been what I've been working on for my career, learning from primarily Inuit knowledge holders, but other First Nations and Métis partners as well over time. It's so important to have, to learn from Indigenous perspectives. They're the experts in their lands, in their ways of life. There's so inspiration and innovation that can be learned from a very holistic way of thinking and the connections between people and their environments in all ways. So yeah, we've worked so hard, and many others have as well, to ensure that Indigenous knowledge can be learned from very respectfully within partnerships. And this relates a lot to the actual methodologies for working together, which I would be happy to provide a more in-depth written response.
Now we will have to end this panel. Mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I would like to welcome for this panel Dr. Kelly Kobe, scientist from the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. Welcome. We are also joined by video conference by Dr. Grace Karam, Assistant Professor of Higher Education and Coordinator Higher Education Graduate Program, University of Toronto, by video conference. And our third witness for today, for this panel, is Mr. Vincent Lariviere, Professor at the University of Montreal. Welcome to all the witnesses. All of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will proceed to the round of questioning. And we will start with Dr. Kobe. Dr. Kobe, you can please go ahead, and you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the invitation to discuss the impact of federal funding criteria on research excellence in Canada. I am a scientist at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute and an associate professor at the University of Ottawa. I also co-chair an international initiative called DORA, Declaration on Research Assessment. DORA operates globally and across all disciplines. Our recommendations at DORA apply to funding agencies, academic institutions, journals, metrics providers, and individual researchers. DORA advocates for broader assessment criteria to acknowledge the diversity of researcher activities. Our meeting today comes at a time where the criteria to assess researchers in this country is shifting. Historically, decisions were based on quantitative metrics, things like the number of articles we published, the journal impact factor of where those publications sat, as well as the amount of funding that we brought in. Quantitative metrics are easy to calculate and make them convenient to assess a lot of people very quickly. Unfortunately, they're not evidence-based, they're not responsive to changes in the research ecosystem, and they're not able to be used for any mission-driven goals of a federal government. The misuse of the journal impact factor, as well as the overemphasis on quantitative metrics, has created a culture in the research ecosystem of publish or perish. As researchers, it is often felt that the surest or only pathway to success in our domain is through publishing more, so doing more, less emphasis on quality, more on quantity. However, presently in Canada, we're seeing a principled shift, moving away from these quantitative metrics, more towards consideration of qualitative metrics that consider broader impact of research. Canada's tri-agencies signed DORA in 2019 and have been working to implement its recommendations since. This process is an evolution, not a revolution. In my view, Canada is becoming active on the global science policy stage with respect to the criteria to assess researchers. They are actively involved in DORA's community of practice for funders. They have a leadership role in the Global Research Council's Research Assessment Committee. And through SSHRC, they've joined RORI, the Research on Research Institute. Concretely, as researchers, there are recent changes that have had widespread and immediate impact on us. For example, CIHR has an entirely new research excellence framework that now considers research excellence across 8 domains, one of which is open science. The tri-agencies as a collective are implementing a new narrative CV. It sounds exactly as it is. It's a descriptive report on what a researcher is doing, how they did it, and why it had impact. And this is replacing a traditional CV that was much more considerate of a list of outputs as opposed to qualitative nuanced assessment. This new format requires that researchers and reviewers alike are trained in both how to create these narrative CVs as well as how to appropriately adjudicate them. Otherwise, there's the concern that old habits and these leadership-style quantitative metrics are going to persist in the written narrative form. I would say that narrative CVs are part of the solution to assessing research appropriately. However, I would say that I'm concerned about how these reforms are being implemented in our country and that there's a gap between the strong science policy that we're creating around this and the actual realities of what's happening at committees. We need to ensure effective monitoring and implementation as we roll out these changes. 3 final short points. First, how the federal government chooses to assess research excellence directly impacts what research is done, how it is done, and who does it. Second, I would say that the Tri-Agency's new definitions of research excellence do not always come to practically be considered in how research is evaluated on committees. This again comes back to repeated implementation gaps from what we say we want to do and what actually happens. Finally, even if we were to assume that the criteria used to assess excellence in this country, historically or presently, were appropriate, there are a series of issues with how funding is administered in this country that prevent us from achieving that excellence in an efficient way. One example is the across-the-board funding cut for funded research projects. There's also, in my view, incredibly limited grant monitoring. Once we get funds based on the promises of what we wrote in our grant, there's very little monitoring to see that as researchers and as a federal government that we're returning on that investment. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Kobe. And now we will proceed to Dr. Grace Curran for 5 minutes. Dr. Curran, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, honorable members. Merci pour l'opportunité de parler de ce sujet important. When we compare Canada's position in scientific research with other members of the OECD, there are several paradoxes that come to light. I will present these paradoxes as a way of clarifying Canada's research and development sector and those who work within it. Specifically, I'll examine the role of post-secondary institutions, the impact of international research collaborations, the role of the business sector, and labor market inefficiencies that have led to an underutilization in our PhDs. I'm going to conclude with several recommendations to help strengthen Canada's research production. So how does Canada compare globally? Well, Canada's general expenditure on research and development as a percent of the GDP is notably below the OECD average, and it has declined steadily since 2001. The paradox, of course, is that higher education expenditures in research and development have increased 30% in the same 20 years. So Canadian post-secondary institutions and the researchers they house play a significant role in the country's research and development. The second paradox is that our percent of publications per researcher, we're 7th in the world. That's great. But our production of patents, we're actually 18th from the bottom. This is likely because of fairly low levels of R&D in the business sector. Even though industry tends to fund some R&D in post-secondary institutions, the ties are relatively loose. Third paradox. This relates to international collaboration and a significant gender divide. Studies have repeatedly confirmed that international collaboration is correlated with an increase in research production, often identified by publications, however limited. Yet in Canada, a statistically significant gender divide exists between men and women researchers. Men have significantly more international collaborations and thus more high-impact research outputs. And the final paradox relates to labor and personnel. Although Canada has increased the number of individuals graduating with doctoral degrees, the number of tenure-track positions has plateaued. This has led to highly skilled researchers being employed part-time, precarious positions, mainly focused on teaching, and some eventually leave academia. You just have to visit one of Canada's amazing colleges or universities, cegeps, polytechnics. You see a huge labor force of underemployed PhDs, many with international experience and many women. And because of our R&D being housed in the post-secondary institutions, our private sector does not absorb PhDs in the same way as other countries. So what does this tell us about scientific research in Canada? Higher education is a significant actor. We have relatively loose business ties. We have limited participation in global collaboration and an inefficient labor market that's not making the most of its skilled labor. So what do I recommend? Well, first, post-secondary institutions are at the heart of our research success. So keep funding universities and colleges. Canada needs to increase research funding to build the infrastructure at smaller institutions, as others have said in these panels. Definitely at our colleges with their ties to industry and applied research. This practice of funding both projects and institutions has been very successful in the European context. In contrast, Canada tends to focus more on the projects than the institutional infrastructure, and we need to just bring institutions up as well. Second, fund both theoretical and applied research, establishing strong partnerships with industry to make a pipeline to patents. But as gatekeepers of research funding, we need thoughtful regulatory frameworks that ensure it's done ethically and equitably, considering the social impact of research. And third, we have to expand who is considered a researcher. Our precarious faculty who teach on part-time limited contracts are rarely eligible to apply for federal funding. Moreover, federal funding prevents salaries from going to principal investigators, meaning that a part-time researcher, where they are eligible to receive a grant, cannot increase their income to a living wage with funds from the grant. Our selection criteria needs to adapt to the reality that not all researchers have the same conditions of employment. Fourth, we need to increase our global collaborations and provide funding for travel, to work globally with other teams. When I have conducted research on international publications, the other teams in other countries are shocked that international collaboration is not one of our requirements. And we need to focus on these big issues that impact our planet. And lastly, we need targeted programming to support populations of researchers who are left outside of the high-impact world of scientific research. Women, researchers of color, Indigenous communities. In short, we want to see research funding going to diverse institutions and diverse researchers who can make Canada a global leader in scientific research with a positive social impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coram, and we will now proceed to Mr. Vincent Lariviere, the professor from University of Montreal. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Génial. Écoutez, merci beaucoup de l'invitation à témoigner sur une question importante qui est celle de l'excellence en recherche. Donc, mon nom est Vincent Lariviere, je suis prof de sciences de l'information à l'Université de Montréal. Je suis aussi titulaire de la chaire UNESCO sur la science ouverte et co-titulaire de la chaire de recherche du Québec sur la découvrabilité des contenus scientifiques en français. Je ne représente pas ici l'Université de Montréal. Je suis plutôt ici à titre personnel en tant qu'expert qui étudie la communauté scientifique depuis environ 20 ans, et plus spécifiquement la question de l'excellence et de l'évaluation de la recherche. Le premier élément qui est important de mentionner, c'est le manque de consensus sur ce que c'est l'excellence en recherche. Ça s'observe à peu près partout dans la communauté scientifique. Les comités d'évaluation des financements vont pas toujours s'entendre sur les projets qui sont les plus importants. Les éditeurs en chef des revues et les évaluateurs s'entendent pas toujours sur s'il y a un article de qualité ou de basse qualité. Donc, l'excellence en recherche, c'est d'une certaine façon un peu le saint graal du monde scientifique, mais ça demeure assez difficile à définir. Il y a une grande part de subjectivité dans tout ça. On peut expliquer ça de plusieurs façons, mais il y en a une qui est claire, c'est que l'excellence en sciences, elle est plurielle. Ça peut varier en fonction du contexte. Donc, ça peut être l'ingéniosité d'une méthode, l'originalité de la question de la recherche, la qualité de la construction d'un argument ou encore les applications potentielles d'un projet de recherche. Donc, en raison de ce manque de consensus-là, souvent, les comités d'évaluation vont se rabattre sur des indicateurs quantifiables, des trucs que l'on peut mesurer. Donc, combien d'articles ont été écrits dans des revues prestigieuses, combien de citations ont été reçues, est-ce que la personne a obtenu son diplôme dans une université prestigieuse, et aussi, est-ce qu'elle a déjà obtenu du financement? Parce qu'un des critères principaux pour obtenir du financement, c'est d'en avoir déjà obtenu. Donc, ces marqueurs quantifiables ne reflètent pas toujours l'excellence en recherche, mais ils rendent l'évaluation beaucoup plus simple. 10 publications va toujours être plus élevé que 5 et 1 million va toujours être plus élevé que 100 000 $. Donc, cette façon d'évaluer les scientifiques et leurs projets, souvent c'est fait de façon implicite, ça amène des enjeux importants pour la communauté scientifique canadienne. Donc, en mettant l'emphase sur le volume de publications, on favorise certains travaux, mais aussi certaines thématiques qui sont plus faciles à publier. Ça contribue à la surproduction d'articles. Il ne faut pas confondre avec la surproduction de connaissances. Ça contribue au bruit et à la recherche d'informations et surtout celle de qualité modérée. Désolé. Bon nombre de prix Nobel, dont Peter Higgs a dit qu'ils ne pourraient pas faire leur découverte aujourd'hui dans le contexte de l'évaluation de la recherche. Donc, je veux faire 3 recommandations pour un peu améliorer, si vous voulez, l'excellence en recherche au Canada. La première, elle est quand même assez compliquée, mais je crois qu'elle est faisable. C'est de permettre aux organismes de financement d'expérimenter avec l'évaluation par les pairs. On est conscient que l'évaluation par les pairs, elle est imparfaite, mais il y a bon nombre de pays qui ont entamé des expérimentations là-dessus, et entre autres la Suisse, la Norvège, le Royaume-Uni, qu'on ne peut pas dire qui sont des pays, disons, qui sont en retard scientifiquement. Donc, il y a des pays qui ont pris le taureau par les cornes, qui ont réalisé les biais qui étaient associés à l'évaluation de la recherche actuellement et qui se sont dit, on doit essayer de trouver de nouvelles façons de favoriser l'excellence. Et comme le dit mon collègue Julien Larègue, ce serait important que les résultats de ces expérimentations-là soient disponibles pour la communauté des experts. La deuxième recommandation, elle est un peu liée avec ce que ma collègue Dr. Kobe a dit, c'est la question du CV qui est évalué par les différents comités. Récemment, on a mis en place le CV narratif, ce qui me semble a priori une bonne idée, mais c'est pas tout à fait clair comment ce CV-là va être interprété. Hein, parce qu'il va être aussi interprété en termes de volume. Dernièrement, moi, j'ai eu à faire un CV narratif de 7 pages qui était plus long que la demande elle-même. Donc, on n'a absolument aucune idée comment les comités vont évaluer ça. Donc, il faut réfléchir à cette question-là. Et certains pays ont mis en place des CV courts. Un CV de 2 pages qui ne met pas l'emphase sur les volumes de publication et qui permet, en fait, de montrer les publications qui sont les plus, disons, pertinentes au projet. La troisième, c'est toujours sur la question des indicateurs. Au Canada, il n'y a pas de demande explicite dans la plupart des cas de fournir des indicateurs pour les évaluations, mais souvent les comités, les membres de comités vont sortir des indicateurs de leur chapeau dans l'évaluation. Évidemment, les comités sont souvent souverains, donc il n'y a pas grand-chose qu'on peut faire. Je crois qu'on doit prohiber l'utilisation de ces indicateurs-là dans les comités d'évaluation des organismes subventionnaires. Non, donc, non seulement ne pas les pousser, mais de dire au comité que tout ça est à l'extérieur, si vous voulez, du périmètre d'évaluation. Donc voilà, je vous remercie et au plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
Thanks a lot. Now we will proceed to our round of questioning, and we will start with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Baldinelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And quickly, I'd just like to indicate I'll ask one question, then I'll cede some of my time to my colleague, Mr. Ritter. She has a few questions she'd like to ask. But I'd like to follow up with Ms. Colby and Mr. LaRiviere. Mr. LaRiviere, you had mentioned the notion, it struck with me, that there's a lack of consensus on what constitutes research excellence. And Ms. Colby, you talked about DORA and the use of the move away from quantitative to qualitative, for example. But and that being accepted, the DORA principles being accepted by the 3 federal granting agencies. But I read in the briefing materials provided that only 9 universities have accepted that principle. So why would you think only so limited uptake on that with regards to accepting the DORA principle? What's precluding others from accepting that idea?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. It's a great question. So I would say the DORA movement in Canada is quite robust. There are many institutions that are thinking about responsible research assessment more through this broader narrative sort of impact perspective. And that, sometimes the administrative hurdles of pushing a signature onto a declaration aren't worth the battle. So we see, I see personally as the co-chair of DORA, many institutions in this country actively implementing so-called responsible research assessment without having signed a declaration. And certainly the tri-agencies signing it has prompted more to consider that more deeply.
Thank you. And before I cede my time, you had mentioned one of your comments about very little monitoring on how federal funds are being spent on checking the status of projects. If you could write down some of your thoughts on why that is and how we could correct that or work on that, and I'll cede my time to Mr. Ritter.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and being part of our panel. This is going to be you to Dr. Colby. You, being a part of DORA, you come with a wide range of insights from across the country. And my first question is, does current federal funding model support meaningful collaboration between academic researchers, especially related to the technology and innovation sector?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So in terms of meaningful collaboration across sector, I would say that right now there are sort of science policies that we have that I think would support doing that, such as the Open Science Initiative. So for instance, if there's a federal goal towards open science, AI innovation, we need robust research data management. And so we have a policy being rolled out in that respect to, get data management plans done at the front end of research so that at the back end of research, we can have data in a position to share and to be leveraged and innovated upon. So we have the policy, we have the vision, but we don't have the incentives and rewards for researchers to actually do that. So for instance, at my institution and others across this country, it's researchers don't have the skills and the practical knowledge, for instance, to get consent, to de-identify their data, to prepare it for that sort of mission-driven goal of AI innovation. So I think that because we don't have those skills, we need as researchers to upskill, and to do that, we need to know that we can focus on getting those skills, getting that training, and that's going to be valued. It's not just about producing more, it's pausing, taking time to upskill ourselves so that we can, get our data in a position for lending towards collaborations beyond sort of our single use of how we envision that data to be used.
Thank you very much for your answer. The second question I have is, what improvements do you think can be made to ensure that our federal research funding programs are flexible enough to captivate community-focused research happening in local innovation hubs? Mine in particular, in Kitchener, how do we rely on your words, not rely on your words, publish to fund, and start relying more on innovate to fund?
Thank you. So I think one thing that needs to be done is that there needs to be more consultation on an ongoing basis between, say, the tri-agencies and the government and the researchers that are in the institutions. There's a bit of a siloing, I think, in terms of how messages and policies translate from the federal funders to the institutions. And so, at the tri-agencies, they may be saying, we signed DORA, we value a broad range of impacts, including community-based research and these types of things. But if the institutions, don't send that same message, there's a bit of a mismatch. So researchers are often, I feel, caught between two systems as we roll out at the federal level. So we're being told, EDI, open science, broader excellence from our federal funders. But many of our institutions are still focused on those quantitative indicators. So it creates a duplication of effort for us as researchers.
You mentioned that some of the qualitative things that are happening right now is EDI, and so my fear in that is trying to create inclusion is actually creating exclusion, especially in the funding world. And so in its form today, through defining sex, skin color, things like that, how truly inclusive do you think the criteria is for awarding federal funding in the broader research spectrum?
It doesn't speak specifically to EDI. It speaks about broader incentives and rewarding a range of different outputs that researchers contribute to, and being transparent about how you assess researchers. So I think that's really critical. We need to know what the criteria are.
Thank you. A hand raised by Dr. Karam.
Thank you. I want to comment on the EDI question.
I think that time is up. We are now proceeding to the next member. Maybe you will get an opportunity in there. Now we will proceed to MP Jessic for 6 minutes. MP Jessic, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. As all three of you have done, the purpose of this committee is to make recommendations on the type of evaluation criteria to be used for the allocation of federal funding through the tri-agencies. As one of the members of this committee who was here in the previous Parliament when we studied this question, we heard a number of ideas. Dr. Kobe, you mentioned the publish or perish imperative. One of the ideas we heard was that perhaps applications should be completely blinded as to who the proponent is. In other words, that would remove that potential bias, and simply the evaluation would be done on the quality of the proposal. That would perhaps be part of a stepwise review of the application. In other words, once various proposals were considered excellent, that they could then proceed to perhaps more evaluation of the team, and perhaps, since we're so interested in the whole DEI evaluation criteria, perhaps that could be part of the second step and might relate to training of researchers, etc. So I'd like some of your comments, sort of in a very practical way, as to see how you could remove some of the potential biases that have existed really institutionally for a long time.
Thank you for your question. Through you, Madam Chair. I think you point at issues or shifts in the potential way peer review is done at grant panels, and I would agree with your suggestion. I think the idea of having blinded peer review at these committees could help to address some of these sort of issues and selecting for excellence, and then a second phase where perhaps it's not blinded. I would encourage the committee to consider making peer review more open, generally speaking. So while we may have blinded peer review initially, at the end phase of once selection is done, I think it would be of extreme value to sort of open up the black box that is the peer review process in this country for federal funding and make those peer review reports available as open as possible. Sometimes there's sort of trade secrets or things that need to be closed, but I think for me, in order to improve the system, we need to know how the system is working, and we need to do active research or meta-research on peer review to improve it. So we don't want to, go from one system that's clearly not working to another system that we think might be working better, but don't actually have the evidence. So as a researcher, I think we need research, meta-research, to show that, the movements or goals for how we'd like to change peer review and select for excellence are actually being changed and achieved. Right now, across the board, I would say there's very little implementation monitoring of our policies and practices.
So thank you for that. And perhaps you could, since you've raised it yet again, the whole issue of grant monitoring. How do you see that happening? Would the original peer review assessment team have sort of a role in that? Would there be a sort of time frame, a sort of let's take a look at where they're at? It seems like a lot of extra work. So could you try and convince me that it would be really useful to have that piece?
Absolutely. So right now in Canada, once you get funding, there's essentially no monitoring until your final report for the vast majority of grants. And so in other jurisdictions, there are grants officers assigned to funded projects to ensure that certain milestones are met and that overall outputs are delivered upon. So I'll use from my area of expertise the concept of open science. So for instance, with clinical trials, we have federal policy to ensure that these trials are registered prospectively in an appropriate registry. We know that we're not doing that for meta research. So, we have a policy and we need to monitor that when we do fund a trial, that those trials are indeed getting registered and that subsequently the results are being reported fully and completely. We know from an audit that we've done that about half of trials conducted in this country never see the light of day in terms of having their results reported in a public registry or even in a peer-reviewed publication. So I think that's suggests inefficiency, and we want to make sure that there's monitoring there to make sure some of these basic science policies, which we have, our science policies I think are quite strong and getting stronger, but it's that they're being implemented on the ground.
Thank you. And perhaps in the remaining time, Dr. Karam wanted to give us a little bit more on DEI, so perhaps this would be an opportunity for her to contribute.
Thank you so much. I think we see this polarization that assumes that there's a woke community on one side and then others who are feeling shut down on the other side. And we really have to nuance that, because if we're looking at trying to change our labor market inefficiencies, we have to remember that we have a large number of recent Canadians, of groups of students that are in graduate school, are soon to be our main researchers, our early career researchers, and they come from a rich wealth of communities that have cultural, religious heritages. They also see themselves as apart from the woke community, but they're not the top tier researchers who are saying we have to just pick based on merit. I hope I can begin to point out the differences between these groups and say that if we include EDI in an effective way, we actually bring all of those new researchers into the Canadian landscape of research production, making sure that we actually have the best talent from around the world that has chosen to live in Canada doing research. So we cannot throw EDI out in this myth that we're not choosing the best research because of the groups of recent Canadians that are highly educated and that need to get into our labor market.
Time is up for MP Jessic, and we will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Joncas. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie les témoins qui sont avec nous. Ma première question va être pour professeur Larivière. Dans vos travaux, vous avez démontré que le U15, donc le regroupement de 15 universités, reçoit environ 80% des fonds de financement de la recherche au Canada depuis les 20 dernières années et que 5 universités dans ce regroupement en particulier captent près de la moitié de ce montant. Est-ce que ce critère d'allocation fédérale favorise réellement l'excellence ou entretient-il plutôt une concentration qui perpétue le prestige institutionnel sans améliorer la production scientifique?
Question. Évidemment, c'est une question complexe et c'est difficile de trouver des relations de cause à effet dans tout ça. Mais il y a un phénomène bien connu en sociologie des sciences qui s'appelle l'effet Mathieu, qui dit qu'en gros, les scientifiques ou les institutions qui ont le plus de capital symbolique, qui ont le plus de prestige, vont en recevoir encore plus, indépendamment de la qualité intrinsèque de tout ça. Disons que si deux scientifiques trouvent la même chose en même temps, en toute probabilité, on va attribuer la découverte à celui qui a déjà énormément de capital. Donc, on sait que ça fait partie des effets, disons, naturels du système scientifique, d'en donner plus à ceux qui en ont déjà. Donc, évidemment, si on base le financement futur sur le financement passé, bien, ça amène la concentration des fonds, puis en grande partie entre les mains des chercheurs qui sont affiliés au U15.
Selon vos données, plus une université reçoit de financement, plus le coût moyen par article augmente, même en tenant compte de l'impact. Est-ce que cela ne démontre pas que les critères fédéraux actuels qui concentrent les fonds nuisent à l'excellence en réduisant l'efficacité scientifique par dollar investi?
Effectivement, c'est ce que les données montrent. Donc, le coût par article est plus élevé dans les grandes universités. Encore là, en bon scientifique, il faut douter des données. Donc, effectivement, on essaie de trouver les causes de tout ça. Je peux pas dire que c'est ça que ça montre, mais c'est ce que les données montrent que ça coûte définitivement plus cher. Si on est charitable, on sait que les grandes universités collaborent beaucoup avec les petites. Donc, en toute probabilité, il y a des effets, on pourrait dire, en anglais, on dirait des spillover effects qui se font sur les plus petites universités. Mais voilà. Mais donc ça prend plus de recherche. Puis je rejoins ce que ma collègue a dit. On a besoin de données sur le système de la recherche. Ce que l'on veut faire dans nos laboratoires, c'est trouver une façon de financer la recherche. Il faut créer des politiques publiques qui financent la recherche de façon plus juste, qui génèrent le plus de bénéfices collectifs. Et pour ça, on a besoin que les organismes subventionnaires partagent leurs données.
Oui. Donc, vous avez évoqué un peu plus tôt que les comités d'évaluation par les pairs peuvent utiliser des indicateurs bibliométriques. Vous avez donné l'expression de sortir des mesures, des indicateurs, de leur sortir de leur chapeau, comme des citations, des facteurs d'impact, le H-index, les volumes de publication comme critères d'excellence. Or, vos recherches montrent qu'ils favorisent certaines disciplines, notamment et la langue anglaise aussi, les publications scientifiques en anglais, et des avantages des sciences humaines, les francophones et les chercheurs émergents. Ces critères reflètent-ils vraiment l'excellence ou introduisent-ils plutôt de nouveaux biais dans le financement de la recherche?
C'est très clairement des biais que ça amène dans le système de la recherche. Il n'y a rien d'intrinsèquement supérieur à publier dans une langue ou une autre. Or, à peu près tous nos comités d'évaluation vont donner, on pourrait dire, un prestige a priori plus élevé aux publications en anglais. C'est comme ça au Canada, mais c'est comme ça dans à peu près tous les pays du monde. Mais au Canada, il faut admettre que ça amène une dynamique particulière dans l'équilibre linguistique du pays. Quand les scientifiques belges passent à l'anglais, ça ne joue pas sur leur dynamique linguistique parce que l'anglais, c'est pas une des langues nationales. Mais dans le cas du Canada, tout passage à l'anglais, forcément, influence l'équilibre linguistique du pays.
Je poursuis dans vos travaux qui révèlent qu'il y a des écarts liés à la taille des établissements, à la langue, notamment pour les chercheurs francophones et aux disciplines. Or, l'équité, la diversité, l'inclusion, donc des critères qui sont mis de l'avant par le gouvernement fédéral, se concentrent surtout sur la diversité démographique. Ne faudrait-il pas élargir ce critère pour inclure ces inégalités mesurables qui conditionnent l'excellence scientifique?
Et par là, vous voulez dire les inégalités linguistiques?
Effectivement.
Effectivement. Donc oui, je pense que c'est une dimension. Si on considère le DI d'une façon plus générale, et en plus, il y a une loi sur les langues officielles qui devrait s'appliquer à tout ça, effectivement. C'est une dimension de la diversité qui amène une plus grande pluralité de points de vue dans l'espace scientifique. Et le Canada, il gagne, on pourrait dire, un avantage. Il faut voir le français comme étant un avantage pour la communauté scientifique canadienne, pas comme étant un handicap.
Des études internationales comme celle d'Agard et Hall concluent qu'une distribution plus dispersée des fonds produit davantage de résultats collectifs. Est-ce que les critères fédéraux canadiens devraient évoluer dans ce sens pour mieux servir l'excellence?
Les choses au Canada, à mon avis, se sont beaucoup améliorées. Il y a eu un moment où la concentration des fonds était telle que les taux de succès étaient beaucoup plus bas. Au CRSH, par exemple, en ce moment, on a deux types de demandes. On peut demander un plus petit montant et les taux de succès vont être plus élevés, puis ou demander un plus gros montant et le taux de financement va être plus bas. Mais je pense qu'il y a davantage d'expérimentation qu'on peut faire pour la déconcentration des fonds de recherche, parce que ce que la déconcentration amène, en fait, c'est davantage de chances de découverte. Hein. Plus on a de chercheurs qui cherchent, plus il y a de découvertes qui vont être faites.
Puisque les fonds fédéraux proviennent de l'argent public, ne devrait-on pas exiger que les critères d'attribution favorisent non seulement l'excellence, mais aussi une diversité institutionnelle, linguistique et régionale? Quelles réformes concrètes recommanderiez-vous, comme des plafonds par chercheur, un financement de base élargi ou un meilleur soutien aux chercheurs émergents pour mieux aligner la distribution des fonds sur l'excellence?
D'une certaine façon, tout ça est des bonnes réponses. Mais ce que je veux surtout, c'est que nous donnions l'espace pour expérimenter. Concevoir qu'en ce moment, le système de financement génère des inégalités, qu'il y a des biais qui existent en ce moment et qu'en expérimentant, on peut trouver des façons un peu plus justes d'accorder et effectivement développer de mieux mesurer ou de mieux qualifier l'excellence scientifique qui, je le rappelle, comme je l'ai dit un peu plus tôt, elle est plurielle. Il n'y a pas une seule façon de faire de la science.
Up, and we will now proceed to the second round of questioning, and we will start the second round with Mr. MP Singh Mahal. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses, and thank you to the members opposite as well. Since this committee is about the government funding on research and academic excellence, I would focus my questions on how the grant should go and how better use of that grant can be made. So I would start with the heavily talked about question of DEI in this session. So my question is to Dr. Karam. You said in your evidence that drawing balance is an important thing that we need to keep in mind when federal funding comes in question. So my question to you is that when the DEI is there, it's a kind of mandatory condition by the government on the funding on the educational institutions. How do you think that how do you think balance can be drawn about folks or researchers who do not want to disclose that information and who want if they disclose that information, they will be there are risks that they will not get that funding or they will not be approved in the application. So how would you respond to that?
Thank you for the question. We have years of research that shows that names, for instance, bias hiring with resumes, right? This is well documented in sociology. And so when we have things like blind peer review as part of the process, that can be a way to evaluate the research without considering EDI. So that's one option. But we also have really good streaming that we do for early career researchers. You say I'm an early career researcher and you're in a particular pool that allows you to be evaluated accordingly. So why can we not have certain pools that allow people who are saying, I want to be evaluated on merit, and people who say, look, I'm from a group that has historically been marginalized in the academy. I do not have the family resources. I went to a small institution. I don't have the institutional resources to get these great research ideas off the ground. So when I say that we're going to fund research infrastructure, I work at a university where my hand is held from the inception of my research ideas right until the moment we click send on my SHRC grants. And I have such a robust community offices that help me. And we want to make sure that groups of people who don't have access to that have access to that. So in their files, if we know that they're from one of these groups and they've been able to identify the reasons that they have been on the outside of a research community, we want to bring them in because that research that's getting missed is actually putting Canada behind. And we know that international collaboration increases publications. And so the people who have natural ties to other parts of the world because they're first generation Canadians in the academy or they've come here with a PhD from another place, those people are a huge asset in the Canadian labor force and we are missing it.
Yeah, that was my next question actually. So you already mentioned that that people from international jurisdictions who come to Canada with PhDs in hand, they are also not being taken care of and they are underemployed because of they do not qualify for the grants that are available. So don't you think that putting a clause like DEI also eliminates those who want to be involved in the education, but they don't want to come up because they don't want to disclose their political affiliations, or they have a fear of not being accepted if they disclose their political affiliations?
So political affiliations are a serious concern right now. But there are many other indicators and factors that allow us to identify groups, right? We are social scientists. We do well at creating metrics and following them. It is not impossible to create effective selection criteria that allows us to protect people's political affiliations or things that are right now. We have a lot of things that are politically sensitive, but at the same time allows us to identify first-generation Canadians, those from groups that are not well represented in the academy, and say these factors will prioritize your research so that this important issue can get on the ground. If our application systems are so limited that our research are scared, we do need to reevaluate that. But is it just EDI, or is it that we don't have a robust system of academic freedom right now that protects academics overall, right? And so I do think that we have to make sure that these people who are coming in with high skills, this is well documented in the medical sciences, the limitations to transitioning to Canada to employment. We want to do the same thing for our PhDs in all disciplines to make sure that we have programming that isn't EDI for the sake of faces and tokenism, but that it's taking people with skills and helping them transition those skills to Canada.
We will now proceed to MP McKelvey. MP McKelvey, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam. So, science research, we think of research as the time you start the experiment to end the experiment, but there's a lot that happens before that, and there's a lot that happens after that. So on the research funding criteria, which was the actual basis of this study and why we're bringing you here. I heard some great comments earlier. I'm hoping you could elaborate a little bit on that around knowledge mobilization and uptake and how we should be including or not including that in research criteria for awarding. So maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Kobe.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think for me, it's difficult to answer this question generally, right? Because we have such a range of research activities in this country. So there are some people who are doing purely discovery-based research. There are others who are doing community-based research, for instance, that lends itself very well to sometimes immediate translation in those communities. So what I would say is that we need to ask our researchers what it is that they intend to do and understand from them and their community through consultation what the indicators for success might be. So in some areas, immediate impact on communities and policy and the like, and mobilization in that way is something that may be relevant. In others, that's going to be less relevant. So I think we need to open up the conversations with our disciplines to consider how we define research excellence with a discipline-specific lens.
And following up on that, I previously was an NSERC committee member for assessing applications. And NSERC has a wide variety of programs. So there's discovery, where it is very fundamental science-based. But then I was on the selection committees for something that was more applied, where knowledge mobilization was there. So in your expert opinion, should we be having different grants and programs with different objectives?
Yes, I think so. I think if we have mission-driven goals in this country, the incentives and rewards to achieving those goals may differ, right? So, and where they differ, we need to appropriately create the incentives. So right now, I'll give the example of AI, which I mentioned before. In order to do AI, you need large quantities of data. We have large quantities of data that are siloed by individual researchers and their institutions. So if there's a mission-driven goal to achieve that, one of the things we might want to think about incentivizing is data management, data sharing, responsible consideration of privacy versus openness in how we approach that. So I think that if we want to sort of move towards specific mission-driven goals, we have to be considerate about how to appropriately incentivize those in that context.
Okay, great. My next question is for yes, Dr. Karam. Your name is so tiny on the screen for me to see. My question is around curiosity and questions. So we just spoke about and heard about knowledge mobilization and uptake, but I'm just wondering about like that curiosity and asking the right question. And in that respect, I was just wondering maybe if you could speak to where EDI might be important around that.
Well, from the very outset, as soon as we have people of different walks in life in a room, we have different ideas. This is at the nature of diversity. And so we one of the really fascinating things we're looking at right now is models of student retention using large data sets with AI. AI cannot recognize certain groups of people because the creators did not make it representative. And so as soon as we have different people sitting at the table, all of those things get corrected. And so the research questions we come up with can be as global as the community that we have. And right now we have major issues facing the globe. We have migration and poverty and climate change. And the students that sit in my classrooms and my doctoral students, they have lived this. And so their questions are at the cutting edge. They are not old and stale. They are the things we need to listen to. So curiosity is at the heart of community, I think.
So as a follow-up of that, do you have examples of where we've gone wrong? I mean, I lean towards the medical community and not having enough diversity there to identify diseases that affect certain groups more proportionally and investment in those different things. So do you have examples of where having a lack of diversity at the table has really set us back?
So when we look at the amazing research that's happening in our colleges, which needs to be funded more strongly, we have this applied research that is looking at how work-integrated learning, for instance, is able to build curriculum. So we're getting a much faster pipeline from post-secondary into the labor market, right? Really important. And so when we have people sitting at the table who've worked in other jurisdictions, they begin to make these networks. So right now we have incredible programs happening at a few of our community colleges where we're making links to institutions in other nations. And Canada plays both a development role but also a learning role in seeing how places with strong, robust technical education can move forward. The sharing of best practices internationally is one of the most effective ways to improve your post-secondary sector, which again is at the heart of your research. And so where it goes wrong is when we have people who have only worked in one small community where they are, and they've done an effective job, but they haven't included the diverse voices of, say, the international students.
Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you.
Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Joncas for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Blanchet-Joncas.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Ma prochaine question va être pour Dr. Kobe. Vous avez mentionné tout à l'heure que les applications de la déclaration de San Francisco sur la recherche étaient assez robustes. Les trois organismes subventionnaires ont pris 6 ans avant d'appliquer donc la déclaration de San Francisco. J'aimerais comprendre comment vous pouvez dire qu'après 6 ans de délai, c'est assez robuste ou c'est assez, à mon avis, un manque de leadership ou de vision. Mais j'aimerais que vous pouvez nous confirmer également combien d'universités au Canada ont signé la déclaration de San Francisco.
Can I clarify the translation trailed off at the end? How many signed in Canada?
Combien d'universités ont signé la déclaration de San Francisco au Canada?
I don't know the exact number of universities. There's over 65 organizations, so some of them may not be universities. Right. They may be publishers or funders as well. So yeah, we signed in 2019. My understanding is that part of the delay in implementation was due to the pandemic. However, I think I know of no jurisdiction in this world that has sort of done responsible research assessment implementation, and I don't think that it's something we would ever want to be done. I think as a federal government, we will always want to be monitoring, evaluating, and improving how we assess research excellence in this country and how we fund research.
La réponse est seulement 6 universités au Canada qui ont signé la déclaration de San Francisco. À mon avis, ça peut certainement amener cette hypothèse que j'aimerais que vous me clarifiez. Est-ce que le maintien d'indicateurs traditionnels avantage certains acteurs et ça contribue à expliquer la lenteur de l'adhésion des organismes canadiens à la déclaration de San Francisco?
I think that we don't judge sort of the signature as sort of the be-all and end-all to an institution's view on reforming research assessment. There are many parallel change movements that exist in our community beyond DORA that have sort of similar messaging. As I mentioned earlier, for instance, I know of organizations in this country that have reached out, senior leadership, and they're going ahead with reforming research assessment without signing DORA.